Okay, we are now live. Hangout on Air is now live. We're here to talk about Survivor Worlds Apart episode I Lost Count, whichever the last one was. I think it's 11, right?
Yeah, I think it's called Russian Roulette or something.
Yes, Survivor Russian Roulette is definitely the episode name. It's the one that aired on April 28th. I'm Christiana Ellis.
And I'm Mike Mateen, and I have a very bland background, and I'm standing up. That is because I am in an apartment with no furniture.
That happens when you move.
Yes.
You have to either bring the furniture from your old place or get new furniture. Or I suppose you could find a place that has furniture already. I think those are pretty much the options.
Yes. Well, I am doing one of those options. I'm bringing my furniture from my old place, which is why we're so delayed in recording this episode, because I was back in Phoenix packing the stuff. Now I'm waiting for it to move across the country and arrive here.
Mm-hmm. In fairness to you, we probably could have recorded on Saturday, except I couldn't be bothered. Anyway, we're here now. So, let's talk about this episode. It was another episode where some really interesting things happened that didn't ultimately include who went home, because that was who we might have expected. But some of the way that it happened was nonetheless interesting.
Yes. And yeah, I was kind of thinking the same thing. It's like, God, once again, like there's all this build up for it ultimately just to end up the way that I don't want it to.
Yeah. So if we go ahead and we jump right to the beginning, we have Dan continuing to emphasize that Mike has lost all trust. And so it sounds like that rift is not being healed. And we kind of see why in a little bit later, especially on the reward, just that Dan really seems to think that Mike was just being totally paranoid about Rodney.
Yes.
So he doesn't believe him now. And it's this weird thing where we know that he was absolutely 100% right. And he flubbed how he handled it, clearly. But Dan's opposition to him now is based on a faulty premise.
A lot of Dan is based on a faulty premise.
Well, that's true. Dan certainly at this point also says that he does not believe that he is at the bottom of his new alliance, which is bizarre. I mean, I don't know how he could even come to that conclusion. Like, who does he think is at the bottom then? Like, it's not like it's that old adage of like, if you don't know who the sucker is, it's you. Like, who does he think is at the bottom?
Yeah, it baffles me what he's thinking.
Yeah.
Super fan who can't do basic math.
Well, yeah,
someone has to be at the bottom. Yeah.
It's just like Tyler says later. It's like he has this huge blind spot that is what happens after 6. It seems like he's just not even thinking about it.
It really does feel like that, which is part of. It's funny because the irony is that I think Mike is the one that embedded that in him with his sort of blue rallying cry. They kind of got into that mindset of, well, it doesn't matter as long as what we said. It doesn't matter what happens after 6.
Mm-hmm.
Like, but they didn't necessarily consciously say that, but that's kind of where he left them. And the fact that he's now on the outside of that and taking the brunt of what he created, which is they are not ever going to break. So once they didn't want you in there, or once they thought you were being sketchy, he's not working his way back in very easily.
No. You know? Well, I just, especially given the intensity of how that's all playing out, I cannot wait to hear from Dan at the reunion show when he sees how all that really went down. Or alternately, for him to find out sooner, you know?
I'm not positive it's gonna click with him even when he does have it explained to him.
Yeah, you might just sort of come up with the rationale for why he still made the right decision anyway. It's like, well, okay, maybe Rodney was just talking. It was all talk, and Mike still handled it badly, and which is true. I mean, what Rodney wasn't just all talk, but it's also true that Mike dealt with his information in almost the worst possible way.
Right.
I mean, definitively so, in the sense that he alienated all of the people who weren't trying to flip. He took the people who would have stayed loyal to him in a potential flip, and he pushed them away. It's almost a bummer that he's playing relatively well before that and since then, because it was just such a screw up that it just like what might have been. But speaking of Dan, we also have Dan approaching Shireen to see if she's okay. And she's not really. She's still very angry with Will, which we get. And just when we start to think, you know what? Maybe there's an okay guy there in Dan after all. Nope.
No. How did he manage? He's like a character.
Yeah. It's like it's like a Family Guy cutaway or something, where he, is just like, oh yeah, it was really, we were, just want to make sure you're okay, and then they cut away and he's in the confessional. And he's like, well, I didn't know that about her past, and I'm really sorry that she had to deal with that. But she's a drama queen who likes to play the victim, so screw her.
Yeah, I call that karma.
Yeah, right, asshole. What I was all the more angry with him for briefly getting past my defenses and making me think he was okay. It made me even madder for being fake about it. I mean, I suppose we have to, at the very least, give him a teensy amount of credit in that what we had criticized him for partly in the past was not recognizing that you can't be a jerk to everybody who's going to be on the jury. And so at the very least, he seems to have learned that part a little better, but still just awful as a person. Because, that's part of what Shireen was saying, that, this idea of it's not about the game anymore once you make it personal. And it's an interesting question in a show like this of what is out of bounds. Is there anything out of bounds when we're talking just about things that you can say, right? Because obviously there's rules about physical violence. There's rules like you can look through someone's bag, but if they have an idol or something, you can't take it. There's rules, but not really rules about what you can say. And yet, what it actually reminds me of is way back in the first Survivor All-Stars season, when there was this whole bit with Lex and Boston Rob in that season where there was a, hey, because we're friends, can you do me this favor plea, which was returned with a backstab. And it raised that whole question of well, is it even fair or reasonable to ask for something that's outside the context of the game, like as a personal favor? And is there any obligation whatsoever to return that favor on that level? Or is it really all just the game?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. because I feel like it. I don't know. I don't know how to articulate this because I feel like it kind of you can have both. Both can exist.
Mm-hmm.
In that you can ask for things outside of the game because you are real people, just the same that any competitors could have a conversation, you know, during a slow part of a normal sporting event. They could say, hey, can you do whatever? Hey, will you drive my wife home after the game? I have to go do something happen in a sporting event. And then you could go and, create, cause a penalty against them and injure them right afterwards. And that doesn't make them, you can't say like, why did you do that? Why did you tackle me right after you agreed to, drive my kids home or my wife home? Like they're two separate things that while they can happen in the same instance, they are not necessarily, you can have them in that game arena without it being they are one or the other. They don't have to be only one or the other.
Well, it all becomes a big blurry line, right? I mean, because on the one hand, I think we can acknowledge that to some extent you can separate, behavior on a personal level from game strategy, right? Like there's the whole thing where like you might have really bonded with somebody and you really do genuinely like them, but the strategy of the game tells you, you know what, as much as I would love to continue hanging out with this person and I know that they're going to be upset, I have to vote them out because that's the best strategy for me. It's not personal, it's just strategy, right? I mean, I think we can all agree that that's part of the game. That's the whole idea, is that you're forming these relationships with people, but you are in a competitive game, right? But it also starts, like the whole thing with Shireen and Will was not strategy. They just had a fight. And so it wasn't strategy anymore. So that's one area where I think it feels different. The other is, just because you might do something for strategic reasons does not make you immune from being called a jerk for it. I think maybe that's the other difference. It's like, you can do whatever you want. All's fair in Love and Survivor. That does not mean that there are no social consequences for doing something that makes you look like a jerk on national TV.
Correct.
So it would be one thing for someone to, to be able to be in that final tribal council and say, look, it really hurt to have to vote you out. I would, on a personal level, I was bummed because I like you, but you were a threat to me strategically and I'm trying to win. And I hope that we can both respect the game enough to get past those hurt feelings. Like that's one thing, but like what Will said, some of the stuff Dan has said, like there's no game justification for any of that. Because that stuff was pure personal. It's not personal, it's strategy. It was just personal.
Yeah, there was no strategy behind any of that.
Yeah. Now, on the one hand, without wanting to make any excuses for them and what they did, it does sound like dealing with Shireen would get on almost anybody's nerves. That does seem like it's likely to be the case. And we've kind of talked a little bit about that. And if you watch the Ponderosa video, she's there with pretty much only people who are more or less friendly with her. Like, we got Joe and Jen and Haley and yet even there, she gets there and she starts, talking a mile a minute and saying, hey, well, maybe we can have them make this salsa, but I like to make them to make this salsa just like this. And so I'm going to write down the recipe for them. And hey, maybe you think they have these special avocados? Well, maybe they don't. But we can ask them if they do, and I'll get this list. And I was thinking maybe after dinner we could play this. And she's just talking a mile a minute, and everyone else there is kind of going, okay, come on. We're kind of hanging out here. You're making this into work. And so, like, we can see how it might be, well, not that, but at the same time, I think we can acknowledge that it's not, you can find someone irritating and it is a sign of your own character and how you deal with that. You know what I mean? It's like, we can acknowledge that it may be difficult to deal with her and not get irritated, but that also allows us to say, well, these people over here managed to be nice about it and work with her anyway, and try to look past some of those behaviors and see who she is inside and actually build a relationship with her. And then got people over here who scream at her and make fun of her and call her names. And that's a way to, to perform a filter on some of the players left in the game, I think.
Yep, I like that.
So anyway, I think that's pretty much all we had before the reward challenge. The reward challenge is the barrels and planks and a rope that nobody used for anything. To move across the, it's like hot lava.
Yep.
And the reward, of course, is burgers with cheese and bacon. It's just a weird way to say it.
Yeah, it was funny how he said it. And they would go, ooh, ooh, ooh.
Ooh, are there pickles too, Jeff? What about ketchup? Is there ketchup? Sesame seeds on the bun? Anyway, yeah, so it was interesting to see the two different strategies, even though in this particular case, one of them seemed clearly superior to the other, as far as I was concerned. It's kind of, as Mike himself concluded after the challenge, I was thinking just right up front, it's like, Mike, you're doing all the work and you have 75% of your team just standing there while you do everything. Plus, you look like you're going to fall off at any moment and somebody's going to get hurt. It's not, it was not a sustainable strategy.
No.
It would have been one thing, like when they got really gutsy at the end and tried to all do the barrel rolling. I admired the audaciousness of that, at least, but that was when they were desperate and they were about to lose. So it was anything goes, but that's not how it started. They started even, right? So, I think we've still got a little bit of Mike doing that thing where he's so desperate to like regain the ground that he feels like he's lost, that he keeps making these risky maneuvers that don't pay off because they're kind of crazy.
Yep.
I don't know. What did you think about the challenge?
I mean, I agree. It seemed interesting that the one tribe was moving so slowly, and it's like, God, is that ever going to pay off? And then, yes, ultimately, once Mike got tired and he couldn't move as quickly, then the slow and steady won the race. And so I didn't catch it at the front quite like you did. I caught it in hindsight, as but it was clearly the right thing to do. Was not. It's basically, where do you put your priority? Like trying to finish or trying to make sure that you never fall off or drop your, and that seems to be the mentality behind the two. Like, one team went out with, we must finish first, and the other said, whatever happens, we're not starting over.
Right.
And while it didn't end up happening that they had to go back and start over, it ultimately, trying just to finish as opposed to trying not to fall off, didn't pay off. It's one of those, there are adage of like, are you playing to win or are you playing not to lose? Sometimes playing not to lose is the right strategy.
Yeah.
Not always a bad thing.
Right. Like, I don't want to take too much credit. It was more that I saw the Mike's strategy as being kind of really outside the box, but it's just one of those things when you have a challenge like this, there's an obvious way to do it, which is the way the other tribe did it. And so it's not.
I guess that's what confused me. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
Well, just to finish the thought, it was that when there seems like there's an obvious way to do it, that doesn't mean that you couldn't come up with some outside the box strategy that says, whoa, that's counterintuitive, but it really worked. But it's also probably true that when you go way outside the box, about 80% of those are not going to work very well at all. And it didn't seem like there was really any evidence to support that this one was going to be different. And sure enough, it was not. And I think in hindsight, just the fact that you're putting all of the work on one person out of 4 seems like that was the crucial flaw in that whole approach. Yeah. Like if they were tag teaming out doing that role or something, but if it was an activity that only one of them could even be capable of, it just puts the whole challenge on his shoulders, which is not a good sustainable approach.
Yeah. And see, that's where part of the confusion was with me, is that I pictured not exactly what Mike and them were doing, but some variation of that as being the way you were supposed to do it. And obviously in hindsight that seems silly, but that's how rolling and having to like keep moving along sideways barrels as opposed to upright barrels, which is essentially the difference.
Yeah. I feel like maybe they've done it before. There's some reason that that might be why I was thinking of that being the obvious way. But I guess it just, like the way with the upright barrels, you can make a stable platform, and then you can have, you can put the planks from one barrel to the next, and they're stable. They're fixed. They're not wobbling around. And when when the whole thing is to have people not fall off, that seems like an important thing to consider. But
well, I agree. It seemed silly, and I don't think it has to do with you having seen it before. I think it was just for whatever reason I pictured the bear and having to like keep that like thing like train moving. I didn't see it as like one person. I didn't really. To be fair, I didn't sit down and plot out how I would do this challenge. I pictured it more looking like that when he first announced it. But I think it's just that was me having an asinine, like, perception of what should happen. Clearly.
Mike's strategy was certainly gutsy, and it was more exciting to watch, that's for sure.
Yeah. So.
And I also did really enjoy, first of all, him almost doing the splits, which again it's kind of like it's a red flag, but that whole "I do CrossFit, Jeff" was pretty fun.
What a bizarre way to defend that he is okay with.
Yeah. Yeah. And also, even though I would have been so happy if they all barrel rolled across the finish line in one, that would have been so awesome. But at the same time, it would have been so awesome because of how unlikely it would seem to be a winning strategy on the face of it. So in any case, the red team, which is Will, Tyler, Carolyn, and Dan win, is not the obvious combination of folks to win a physical challenge like this, but sometimes that's how it goes. And then there's this great moment where Dan feels bad for Rodney not having won any rewards, and Pro's like, well, you can give up your spot if you want. And then Rodney has to let him off the hook. It's like, no, it's okay.
Yeah, Dan's like, well, I mean, no, Pros, I've learned that I need to start saying nice things. I don't actually mean them.
Yeah. Well, I don't I didn't think you were going to call me on it. I kind of thought somehow I would get credit for feeling bad about him without having to give up a cheeseburger. And anyway, yeah, so that was kind of a funny little exchange there. Rodney does let him off the hook, even though obviously when he gets back to camp, he's grumpy about it. Not, I think, about Dan, but just about not having gotten to go on a reward.
Well, I feel like we didn't see how it all went down, but the way that it was put together, it felt like Dan actually made Rodney more upset by calling attention to the fact that he had not won a challenge, a reward.
I suspect so, because it got his hopes up briefly.
Yeah.
Because I think if Dan had said, you know what? Yeah, if if Dan had just said, Probst, you know what? I want to give up my spot so Rodney can go, I don't think Rodney would have declined.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's it was I agree. I think probably Rodney was more upset than he would have been without that whole exchange.
Yeah. I will say the one last thing that I have here on my notes about that challenge is I had to pause the show during this challenge to take a phone call.
Mm-hmm.
And the part I paused it on was a part of Dan, like it had the closed captioning, you know, sometimes they do when they're like grunting or like yelling.
Yeah.
And there's a part where he's like hoisting something up and it's like, and it says, "I love cheeseburgers." Because he was saying that, but you know, it was just this. And I love cheeseburgers.
I think he
on
was
the whole time.
Probst had said something about him working really hard, and so he was responding with why he's working so hard. But yeah, that's a great pause moment.
So I'm talking on the phone, just watching it. I was like, God. So of course he didn't give up the reward to go eat cheeseburgers. He loves cheeseburgers.
Cheeseburgers are pretty great, in fairness to Dan.
Yes.
So in any case, as we get ready to go into commercial, we have a bit from Carolyn talking about how they want to make sure to keep Dan happy because they want to make sure he's not going to go back to Mike, especially because they're ultra aware of how he's only with them based on false information. Like he only went with them because he thinks that Mike flipped first, which is only half true. So that's kind of interesting that they're aware of that and they're just proactively lying to him and letting him go on and on, which was interesting. I'm enjoying that dynamic, and that's part of why I want to see Dan. I want him to find out and have that be meaningful, but I also agree that you're probably right. If it doesn't come up in any way before the reunion show, he'll probably have time to rationalize it all in his head as not having done anything wrong. So in any case, we first go back to camp, and Mike is in the boat of saying, well, kind of screwed up that challenge for everybody, but they kind of already all hated me anyway, so no lost ground exactly. And then Rodney is grumpy. And this is where Sierra starts talking to Rodney about the idea that Tyler will win if he makes it to the jury, which I'll confess, certainly after some of the conversations you and I have had, my gut reaction at that was, what? Tyler, really? But then I was also just trying to think about it. It's like, well, who else? If you're going to point to one other person in the game right now and say, if they make it to the end, they're going to win. Who is that person?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like if he was up against Mike, if he made it, he is not necessarily guaranteed to win because there are enough people who will have been peeled off by that alliance at that time that Mike, for having survived all of this, might earn enough respect.
Yeah. Well, I think Mike would have a shot, but I feel like, when we have Sierra talking to Rodney about Tyler,
Oh,
I
true.
don't
She's
think
not going to say if
they're
Mike
not
makes it to the end, he's going to win. She has to pick one of their 6. Right.
right. Well, I think she's also not even trying to save Mike. She's more just concerned that like, well, Mike's going to go at some point, but I'm worried about Tyler now that we need to figure out what we're going to do about him. It's
Well, she
like,
also wouldn't make the argument that Mike was going to win because she was making the decision to try to get rid of one of them as opposed
Mhm.
so she still needed Mike to be on her side at this point because she's trying to get them to flip on each other. So it wouldn't make sense to say, well, Mike could make it to the end and win. You have to pick one of them. And of them, he is the one that is the most obviously not already have some kind of baggage, you know? Like Rodney's Rodney. It's going to be hard to justify. You couldn't go to somebody and be like, Rodney's definitely going to win if you let him go any further, you know? Maybe Carolyn, but I think there's enough people who just generally don't like her that it's hard to make that argument. So, yeah.
She would, I think, need to make a more obvious move that she could point to because she's obviously been kind of instrumental in a low-key way, but she's not really made any big moves that we could point to, I don't think.
No. And whereas
but neither is Tyler. Well, Tyler, I don't know. He's doing stuff, certainly.
Yeah, he does stuff. That's the thing. I think they're his activity is what could be perceived as him making moves. He's not actually making any moves. He's just doing stuff and managing to kind of stay in the right spot, you know.
You know, the interesting thing, the way we could take our complaint previously about him and flip it on its head a little bit is this idea of he's always going and just like anytime someone tells him something, he goes and just tells it to everybody else. But the other thing is people keep telling him stuff. He apparently has enough of a relationship with almost everybody that they approach him with information.
Yeah. And then he runs around telling everybody else, and it creates these firestorms that leave him unscathed, essentially.
Yeah.
Because the thing is, the people are so upset about whatever it is in between that they're failing to make the connection that it wouldn't have become a thing had Tyler not went and told everybody. Mm-hmm. The thing has overshadowed the messenger, you know.
Yeah, he's like Littlefinger. Chaos is a ladder. So we go to the reward, and I missed the actual context of the line, but I think at one point Dan said, "There's no Mike in team." Like he's making fun of that. There is no I in team, but he's saying there's no Mike in team.
Yes.
Which I was amused. And he also has a confessional where he's saying the first time Mike doesn't win immunity, and he does some weird like some weird little blowing on his hand gesture that I was not familiar with, and it says "Smell you later," and I'm thinking, what was that? What is that? Is that a thing? Am I just not familiar, or is he just weird? Tell me, like if
in like the 80s.
Oh, okay. I mean, "Smell you later" I've heard before. I've never seen that hand gesture before. I don't know that. It felt like he was making something up, and it just looked weird.
Oh, I don't remember the hand gesture. I thought you were talking about "Smell you later." Smell you
later, yeah. But he did some weird like, and I'm just watching that, and I'm like, what is that? I don't understand what that's supposed to indicate. I mean, from context, we get the general gist of it, but it seems like it's supposed to be some sort of a symbolic metaphor of something that is unclear. So anyway, I thought that was weird. And I wanted to know if it was something that I was just missing. Is that a thing? Sounds like if it is, neither of us know it. "Smell you later," though. Yeah, I need that one.
He was doing like basically like that's like up in smoke, basically.
Yeah, I guess, but he kind of did this weird like he's playing a trumpet or something. It was weird. I feel like I want to pull up a GIF of it or something, but I couldn't. I don't know if I could reliably find it.
Yeah.
In any case, Dan goes on a rant about how wrong Mike was that Rodney was going to flip, and everyone else there is kind of going, yeah, that was really crazy of Mike, huh?
Yeah, Mike's so crazy.
So that was kind of entertaining, and honestly, I still sort of think of Carolyn and Tyler as like being like the bad guys here, but at the same time, I had to sort of give them credit for sort of having created this dynamic where they have achieved, someone brought into their alliance that is clearly at the bottom of their totem pole, who doesn't know it and is only with them because he is mistaken about what happened previously.
Right. He's such the accidental alliance member.
Yeah, it's pretty funny. So this is where Tyler is very happy that Dan doesn't seem to see beyond top 6, because that's as far as they plan to take him. We're pretty much already to the immunity challenge, right? Although I guess we have been going for a while, so it's reasonable. Yeah. So the immunity challenge, the grip strength endurance challenge, I kind of like these. What did you think about the weight being, because there's 2 elements of this that were not necessarily a given. One being that the weight is based on their pre-game weights. So depending on who lost more weight, it might make more or less of a difference. But then also the idea that it's, one for the last man in the challenge and one for the last woman. Because on the one hand, like you could say, okay, well, upper body strength, grip strength, you might say men would have an advantage, but they're also doing it based on a percentage of their body weight.
Yeah, but still.
I'm not calling it unfair. I'm just asking the question.
No, I mean, I think when they get into these ones where it's like, I'm not saying that it's right or wrong. I liked it. I can see why in one like this you would want to do that because, for example, it is a lot harder for most upper body things, there is a female and a male standard because they are not equal, even in a body weight, like pull-ups. Like if you're doing a military test for pull-ups, the male standard is a lot higher because that upper body strength as a percentage of your body weight is higher. That's just a thing. That is an actual thing. It is much harder to have the ratio of your body weight strength as a female in your upper body like that. They're just so.
So it keeps things interesting too to have 2 immunities in play.
Yeah, and it just eliminates. I was going to say it was funny because I actually wrote down eliminates any of this kind of discussion, but then you hit me with that question, and I was like, oh well, I guess we are going to have a discussion. And eliminate creating a new discussion.
It's just when they put rules in place like that, I think it just sort of it creates the idea of, well, it does that rule make it fair, for example, right?
Right.
But so anyway, I didn't have any objections. I was just thought it, is worth discussing, if only briefly. So in any case, with women, Sierra was out first, and then Shireen and Carolyn kind of held out for a little while, but then Shireen went out. Carolyn wins immunity. So at least there's the one of the 2 people that they wanted out who is vulnerable. And then for the men, when it comes down to Rodney and Mike, it was definitely this high pressure situation because, of course, everybody except Mike and Shireen wants Rodney to win. And so Rodney's in this tough position where he's doing the best he can, but he's also got everybody trying to encourage him. And, you know, tell me how you would have felt. I don't know if it's maybe just my annoyance with Dan, but I feel like if it were me in Rodney's situation there, I would want Dan to shut up.
I mean, I want Dan to shut up all the time. I wish somebody would slap him, you know?
Yeah.
That's how we shut people up around there. Yeah, I would want Dan to shut up because I don't like Dan, not because I don't want everybody rooting for me, which so I want to make sure, because you seem to lead the question like you meant everybody, even the people who you weren't truly close with, were rooting for you. And I don't think that's really what you meant, but that's kind of how it led.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's a little bit like that. You know, I kind of acknowledged at the beginning of the question that I might just be biased based on Dan personally. But I guess I just felt like it's one thing to know that everybody's rooting for me, but I feel like I would be trying to just be in the zone and focusing, and having someone talk to me would be distracting. Even if they're saying encouraging things. That was kind of my instinctive reaction, but I don't know how I would really feel in the situation.
Yeah. I mean, just think back to your time as a professional athlete and how you felt. All those people cheering you on that you didn't know. I mean, I joke, but it is similar to that.
There's cheering on, and then there's saying, like, right in your ear, you can do it, man, just hold tight, and you know, you're in the zone, and he just kept talking. I feel like that would be distracting.
I agree, and I wouldn't respond to that, and I don't like that, but there clearly is, that does exist. I mean, that's, you know, Mike, like to bring up, Mike said, you know, I do CrossFit. Well, that is a type of thing that is in some CrossFit gyms very prevalent. Like, that's part of why people go, is for that group encouragement of people coming in when, you know, and saying, you got this last one, man, you got this last one. Like, it's the same context. So
yeah, I guess I get that. You know, my gut reaction was that I wouldn't like it, but again, you know, that's why I asked the question, because you know,
well, I don't like
Rodney didn't tell Dan to shut up.
I don't like it either. I mean, if you think, I mean, somebody made some joke about that, about how they thought I would really like CrossFit because I would be so into all the encouragement. Like, they were making fun of me because they knew I wouldn't. Because if you think, like, the three things I do spending my time working out is, like, I run by myself, I swim where you're buried in the water by yourself, and when I do go to the gym, like I was going when I had my old job, I was going at 6:30 in the morning and lifting in the dark before the gym opened at my work, like by myself. Like, I'm pretty happy just doing it on my own. Like, I don't really want a lot of other people around. I don't like that. So just like you, I don't agree. I wouldn't respond to that kind of encouragement, but I do know that it is a thing. Glad you made it a little more clear what you were asking.
Yeah. Well, certainly I acknowledge that that's part of my question was I wasn't sure if I was just unable to separate my personal feelings for Dan from it. So that was part of why I wanted to ask. But in any case, unfortunately, it's not enough. It seemed, you know, they built the suspense, but you know, Rodney was clearly, you know, losing the slack on his rope at a rate much higher than Mike was. So it seems inevitable unless Mike really just screwed up.
Which does happen in these challenges sometimes.
Oh, yeah. Well, it could have happened. That's why you hold on for as long as you can. You don't give up just because you're falling behind. But at the same time, ultimately, he did go out. And so Mike wins immunity again. Everybody is like, oh. Of course, we've got Carolyn and Rodney hugging and kind of saying, can you imagine if they both won? So Shireen is still the easy, obvious target at this point, you know. So as much as, you know, everybody worked to try to create tension and suspense, both on the editing side and on the player side. Shireen was the obvious target after that.
Yes.
So Shireen pitches to Dan that she is not a threat in any way and keeping bigger threats, which I don't know that she has a better approach available, but I'm always wary of that argument being the reason. You know, it's like someone saying, you should keep me because I'm not a threat. You know what I mean? Like that just inherently sends up red flags to me if I imagine myself in the position of that other person, of like, that argument makes me feel like you're tricking me.
I would agree with you most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
However, I do feel like based on how Dan views and treats Shireen, that's the right way to play this.
Mm-hmm.
Is you're basically saying, look, you hate me and I know you don't want to be around me, but if you hate me, everyone hates me and I can't win.
Yeah.
Without actually saying it that way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's because there is a real point there, and I guess it's just sort of the, like, I can definitely see that being a reason that the others would decide to keep Shireen. It just always squicks me out a little bit to have someone making that case for themselves.
Except when she's making it to Dan, is all I'm saying.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
Because Dan's never going to say, like, that makes me nervous that that sends up red flags. Because Dan thinks, I mean, Dan was the one sitting in there, like, battering her about how she can't do basic math. Like, he was basically saying, you're an idiot. You shouldn't call yourself a Survivor fan because you're so stupid.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was what his nonverbal was saying.
Yeah.
There's no way that he is going to sit there and be like, I misjudged Shireen. She is, this is a little tricky,
Yeah, yeah.
She played to his default, like, because he's clearly like that. She was trying to do what Carolyn and Tyler are doing, which was identify. Dan is very simple,
Mm-hmm.
So identify what you think can make him go on your side and work for it,
I think Dan thinks that he is above the emotional aspects of the game, but it's one of those whole element, it's a little bit like what I was saying earlier, that like, if you can't see the sucker at the table, it's you. It's like, it is the very fact that he thinks he's above that is what is allowing that element to undermine him. You know what I mean? It's like he's not able to think about it rationally precisely because he thinks he already is. Like this whole element of, he was totally with Mike, and then Mike hurt his feelings, and now he's with people who are saying you were right to have your feelings hurt, and that feels good, so he's with them now. But in his head, it's all about, well, I thought I could trust him, but clearly he's an untrustworthy player, and I'm a smart player, so I'm not going to ally with an untrustworthy player. I'm going to ally with all of these other people who were my enemies until a little bit ago, but yeah, I'm sure it's fine now. I don't know.
Well, no, all of them, only two of them. I mean, he did go with the other blues.
Yeah, but he
doesn't know the other blues were enemies. He doesn't know
like,
that Rodney.
I know, that's true. It's like, it's so funny that like, he based on what his own supposed ideals are, he explicitly chose the wrong side.
Yes.
In any case, though, let's see, where are we? Dan, on the one hand, I don't like Dan, but I was also feeling at this point too, though, that given where Dan is, I do think it would be dumb for him to try to keep Shireen at this point. I feel like he has only just now ingratiated himself into a new alliance, and to try to rock the boat now, I feel like would screw that up. Whereas he might actually be better off if they're in a final six situation where it's Sierra, Rodney, and Dan versus Will, Carolyn, and Tyler. Maybe he thinks that he can work with. Even if we know he's on the bottom, he doesn't think he's on the bottom. And even if he was a little bit more aware of that, he's got to be thinking, I'm only going to be able to do something if I'm there with people I can work with, and I can't work with Shireen.
Right. And he saw what happened to Mike when he went against, the prevailing view.
Yeah.
And it only works so many times. Like it's, even if he went with them and they found a way to get rid of Tyler, he's not going to be deep into an alliance with people who are going to take him farther. He would have simply done, like you pointed out, he would have gotten rid of the threat of Tyler, but he would not have furthered anybody else in the game, and it would have been disruptive. And now maybe, in some people's case, a disruption is a good thing, like Mike and Shireen. But in Dan's case, a disruption right now is not necessarily a good thing because there are definitely things he can do at 6, even though he's on the bottom. Because at some point, you have to get down to 2 or 3. And ambitious people like Tyler with you, instead of getting rid of them as a threat, they're the ones that are willing. He's the kind of guy that's going to make moves at 6. Rodney's the kind of guy that's going to make moves at 6. He has a chance to be a part of something like that and continue to work his way.
Yeah.
I mean, he's still an asshole, though.
Well, and I think it's also definitely he's still an asshole. But I think both he and Sierra are theoretically sympathetic to the idea of wanting to get rid of Tyler, but they both just agree it's too soon unless we have the majority on board, which we don't. So if we're going to have to swim uphill on this and try to do something sneaky in order to make that happen, that's not worth it. Not only because it's risky that it might not work and then we are screwed, but also just because, it's dangerous and you unsettle something that seems more solid in exchange for something that's more chaotic. But so in any case, this is where Tyler, suspicious of Dan spending any time with Shireen at all, digs into his bag, finds his extra vote, tells Carolyn, and they're both concerned that, if he did flip back over, that would theoretically allow him to turn the tide and get out Tyler. And so I think that plays into part of why things turned out the way they did in the end. So
it's interesting how what Tyler does ultimately ends up resulting in how things played out the way they did.
Yeah.
Without ever having to make a real move, he has been responsible for the way that almost everything has played out.
Both for good and for ill in his own game.
Yep.
So let's see. We get Dan expressing concern to Mike, saying, well, if you have an idol and you use it on Shireen, you might get me out. And Mike is just feeling like, I can't believe that that's the level of the conversation we're having. It's like, I can't even start to try to convince you that that's not what I would be doing.
Yeah.
Even if I was going to try to do that, I wouldn't be going after you. And he's just sort of feeling like, you're supposed to be on my side, and I know I screwed that up, but now you think I'm going after you? No. I can't even have the actual strategic conversation I really want to have because that's where you're at.
Yeah, that's how terrible of a player you are, is that you were so self-centered in your thinking that you're like, well, I'm not on the bottom. Well, if they use the idol, they're going to come after me, the big threat. No, you're not a threat. You're nothing. You're literally nothing. Like that's
well, see, that's where Dan is letting the emotional stuff throw him off, because he really was tight with Mike, and he has now bought into the narrative that what happened was Mike got paranoid about Rodney without justifiable reason to do so, and as a result screwed up the great thing they had going by flipping over to be with Shireen instead of with this solid alliance they had. And so in Dan's mind, I don't even know you anymore. You turned on this great thing we had. And so that makes sense why he would think, well, you're probably going to come after me next.
Yeah.
You know? And so I get where he's coming from, but it's also completely wrong, as we know. And Mike is frustrated because he's just like, again, not that he has anyone to blame but himself ultimately. He's the one that blew that relationship. So in any case, though, Mike does know, well, he could use his idol, and, they probably could get out Tyler this time. But that's the trick, is if he just keeps it a secret, lets everybody vote for Shireen, and then uses that to get out Tyler, then what? Then he's out his idol, and they still have enough people to just vote him and Shireen out next anyway.
Yep.
He needs to shake something up, which I never would have guessed before going into tribal council that he would do what he did, which was amazing. I mean, it didn't save Shireen, but it definitely shook things up, and he does still have his idol.
Yes, I thought Mike, based on where he was in this situation, I mean, he's my favorite player going on right now. Like, he was doing so many great things. He had a slip up, and I want to be fair, like, to him, the reason why it blew up is because he was right. Not because he made this selection. Like, had Rodney not been thinking that, and Mike been hesitant and been like, oh, well, Rodney flipped, and I'd be like, man, I didn't flip. Like, if he actually didn't, he would have told him, like, why do you think that, man? Like, that didn't actually happen. If he really hadn't, well, Mike wouldn't have reacted in the way that he, like, there's so many pieces to it, but either way.
Yeah, I mean, I think kind of what
one area, but he's recovered well considering.
Right. So considering that he did two really, really dumb things in rapid succession and ruined all of his existing alliances, since then, given that, he's been playing well.
And he played well up until that point.
Yeah, so it was just a really unfortunate episode for Mike.
Yes.
In any case,
it's like a DUI, it's one mistake, but it'll haunt you.
And I think as we talked about in that episode, the second one was really just the result of panicked damage control from the first one. Yeah. That he was sufficiently shaken by how dumb it was that he ended up making it worse instead of better. So we're at tribal council, and we have Shireen talking a little bit more about her past, and Dan tries to equate being a victim of domestic abuse to, well, I was adopted. Those things are the same.
They're the same.
I love that Probst straight up just said, no, they're really not the same, Dan.
They're not the same at all.
They're really not. I loved that he didn't just let it hang there. He actually was saying, nope, that's just incorrect. That's not right.
That's actually not the same. Plenty of people are adopted and not beaten. And
well, and then we have the whole bit with Will saying, like they're pointing out, it's like, even just for the game's sake, doesn't it make sense to apologize to Shireen just because you want to not have her poisoning the jury against you? And he's like, well, if I'm going to apologize, I want to mean it. And that's my game. And he's like, what? It's like, no. Yeah.
I mean, I still think even though we didn't see much from him, I think he is exactly how you described it last time. Like, I think he's just like the hunger or whatever and the stress.
Mm-hmm.
He's just not right. Like,
yeah.
So I think the reason we're not seeing anything from him is because he's just coasting through his days in a daze.
Yeah. He's checked out mentally. He's kind of just riding that anger wave.
Do well in challenges anyway. So,
mm-hmm.
And then he gets into a situation like this, and it's just like he's going to hold his ground. Like he doesn't have the mental capacity right now.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't always, but right now in his current state, he does not have the capacity to empathize with what happened and why he was wrong. He can't play it back. That's what it looks like.
Yeah.
You know? And so I'm starting to get on board with what you're saying, is that I feel like he is going to watch that when he does have his full mental capability, and he's going to feel really bad.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like he's going to do that more than I do Dan.
I agree. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely what I think too. I feel like Will has suffered some sort of a dissociative break here. I'm not a psychiatrist, but nor would it be a good idea to diagnose someone based on an episode of reality television in any case. But at the same time, that's definitely how I read his behavior. He does not seem all there. His answers to questions are not rational ones. He is not responding to the reality of the situation the way it seemed like it. The big clue I had last time was it just like he was not even really answering the questions that were being asked of him. He was just ranting more no matter what they said. And so I think I'm a little surprised that he's apparently still there, but we really saw, like, did he talk at all in this episode other than to tribal council? I don't think so. No,
he seems, that's why I said that's what really sold it for me. I mean, I'm sure that there were interactions with him, but everything that he was around, he was just kind of glassy-eyed and like he wasn't participating in any of the conversations.
Yeah.
That were to anything, basically, or we would have seen it.
And it might be, too, that what little part of him is aware might be sending up, like, sort of the alarm bells of saying, holy shit, what did you just say? But then the rest of him is saying, no, we're not the kind of person who would say that. No, we wouldn't have said that unless she deserved it. Yeah, screw her. But there might be some little piece of him that is worried, like, am I right? Did I just really screw up? And so the rest of his behavior is kind of this defensive response to try to justify it.
Yep.
So let's see. Shireen, is, I mean, nobody's dancing around the idea that Shireen is going to be the target here. So she pretty much just calls out, it's like, hey, you guys, why are you voting out me, who's obviously not a threat, and keeping Tyler? I think Sierra made a tactical error that I don't think it's going to hurt too badly, but for her to sort of agree in principle that maybe Tyler's the bigger threat, but hey, I'm just one vote. And I'm thinking, that's not what your alliance wants to hear. Like, you're basically saying you would flip and vote out Tyler if you just thought you could get away with it?
Well, it was a tactical error, but at the same time, Sierra seems to be more self-aware that she is number 5 or 6 of the 6.
Well, I think that's true.
So and not as critical for her to cue favor with the alliance.
Right. Well, and I think that when Shireen pointed out after that, it's like, well, gosh, if you feel like your points won't be listened to in your alliance, then maybe that means you're not in a strong place in your alliance. I think that hit home for Sierra. I think Sierra heard that and was thinking, oh, yeah. that means that like I have no real say in what my alliance is going to do. I have to vote the way they tell me. Yeah, not a good place to be in. Carolyn talks about how it's possible to make moves too early, which I think is, like I'm not on her side, but that's the right thing to say in her position, because she's got to recognize this instinct that everybody wants to be the one to make a big move, to blindside somebody and screw things up. Everyone wants to be the one to do something like that. And so she's kind of just trying to say, look, we're not saying you can't make moves, but don't jump the gun. Don't make it too early. She's trying to pacify people until they can continue to have it controlled.
I mean, that's exactly the right thing to say. I mean, that's that very, to go back to the original theme of the season and tie that in, that's sort of that white collar manager. I mean, she's selling the dream of you get to make your big moves, but you need to go make those widgets right now. And then, but if you make those widgets for a long time, you could be the CEO. That's the American dream. Like, I'm not saying like she's exactly doing that, but I'm it's that kind of motivation that she's using.
Yeah.
Is the right thing to do. It works. There's a reason why it works.
Then Mike tries to play up the blue loyalty and try to get back to saying that's really what he was always all about. And I think it was an indication that Tyler was a little more shaken and a little bit paranoid already, that he felt the need to speak up and be sarcastic about Mike's loyalty, because I think that's how it was already playing with everybody else. And there was just a tinge of desperation in Tyler having to go, oh, yeah, sure, really loyal, Mike. You kind of flipped on everybody back then. Yeah, that's what happened.
I mean, it's funny that you like sort of played it like this over the top, like improv character, basically.
Yeah.
And that's actually exactly how he did it.
Yeah. I almost did it as John Lovitz's liar character from Saturday Night Live. Yeah, it was Mike who betrayed you all. Yeah, that's the ticket.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I just couldn't help but think that Tyler probably shouldn't have said anything there. He should have let that whole thing be just amongst the blues. Mike is trying to say, hey, I'm all about blue loyalty. And then later, Rodney and Dan point out how, from their perspective, it was Mike that flipped away from the Blue Alliance. And so Tyler could have just let that play out without him having to insert himself in a slightly desperate way.
But what Mike did, though, was create that desperation.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
He'd ratchet that up a little bit, and Shireen, obviously laid the table for him.
Yeah. So when Mike first pulled out the idol, I guess I didn't fully comprehend that he wasn't actually playing it right then and there. Certainly, in hindsight, recognizing that he didn't actually hand it to Shireen could have definitely been a clue to the others that this was a bluff. You know what I mean? It's like Mike is immune himself. So this is not going to be a case where he gives it away and then he gets voted out. If he's really going to give it to Shireen, he could have handed it to her right then. Right? But he didn't. And so that could have been a clue to everybody else. Well, this is a bluff. Then again, like we talked about, if he had done that, he wouldn't have it, right? So it would have been like, okay, well, we saved Shireen this time, but now what? Yeah. So I think he did the best he could at trying to play the bluff, and enough people called him on it that Shireen still went home, but Will and Tyler voted for Dan.
That's what, okay. So that was the part that was the best of this episode. All right. We shouldn't just say just because it turned out the way that we didn't want.
Yeah.
That was awesome. The fact that he basically challenged them to, are you that sure that you're willing to call my bluff? Are you that? Yep. Or are you, paranoid? And identified.
Yeah.
Will, who we've already established is not exactly all together with all of this, and Tyler, who as soon as he found out he was a target, went into this weird panic mode.
Yeah.
And they were the two that didn't call the bluff. The rest of them just did. And, so.
Yeah. So I thought it was great play from Mike, just given, first of all, him not saving Shireen with his idol. As much as I didn't necessarily want Shireen to go, it would have been dumb for Mike to play his idol to save her.
Definitely would have been dumb. This was way better.
Yeah.
Because he now comes in with his idol, still being a strong player immunity-wise. Everyone knows he has the idol now, so there has to be more divisions to get rid of him. You have to now, to flush an idol at this point, you have to have these divisions, and what he did was throw a big grenade into their solidarity. So it's much harder to agree that you're going to vote to flush an idol when everybody's not 100% confident in what's going on anymore, and that gives him a ton of room to maneuver.
Well, and there were details about the way he did it, too, that I think were just extra little things that made it even better. One, which was to say, Shireen is going to vote for Tyler. I'm going to vote for someone else. And so this idea that it could be anyone, not just Tyler. And so it's sort of like, Shireen's going to vote for Tyler. So if you vote for Tyler, maybe Tyler goes home. I'm going to vote for someone else, which means that if you guys crack and also vote for someone else, that person goes home. But of course, Mike did actually vote for Tyler because he was kind of hoping that enough people would do that Tyler would actually go home. Didn't work out that way, but he did at least get part of what he wanted, which is for there to be a division revealed, and for Dan to, find out that he's the one.
Dan, you're on the bottom, dude. You're on the bottom. When they were put balls, like, whatever you call it, like, not balls to the wall. That means going straight. Like feet to the flame. You were the one they voted for. That means you're last.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And not only that, but just I can't help but wonder if Dan is going to be at all receptive to now Mike coming back to him and saying, listen, I have really been with you this whole time. I got spooked.
For your own good.
Yeah, well, it's like this. I didn't want you to go. I wanted you to just see that they didn't value you.
I didn't even vote for you. I actually voted for Tyler. They're the only ones that voted for you.
Yeah. Because the 2 votes for Tyler, it's like, who else is no one's going to want to claim to have voted for Tyler other than Mike and Shireen, right? So I don't think there's going to be any question of them trying to avoid who actually voted for Dan. You know what I mean? Like, would any of them try to claim, if any of them wanted to try to claim that it was actually Mike that voted for Dan, then one of them would have to accept having voted for Tyler.
And not Tyler, which means everyone who can definitively say they definitely, they voted for Shireen, leaves only Will, who can't say that. And is Will going to claim he voted for Dan or Tyler? He's going to say Dan.
Yeah.
So they're going to know that that's where the votes came from.
Yeah, and so we see in the scenes from next time, we see Tyler trying to explain to Dan that's like, it wasn't personal. It was just like you were the only other person who had been mentioned.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you're the last in the thing, dude, so it's you.
Yeah. Yeah, so we also have a clip of who knows where that'll go of Rodney seeming fed up with the whole thing and saying, I'm going to ask you guys to vote me out next. who knows if it does seem like the sort of thing he would say in the moment and then not mean. He's that kind of guy.
And weirdly enough, 6 weeks ago, I would have said, God, I hope that's true. Right now, I don't. Like, I want Rodney in the mix for a while because he's done well with what he's tried to do. He's calmed down. He still has his flare-ups, but he has maintained his course of action, his strategy, and he's done it pretty well.
Although it might be too, though, that he's getting itchy because he kind of had this whole idea of wanting to make a big move to blindside Mike that kind of got blown up when Mike blew up his own game. And so now it's like, well, okay, everyone doesn't like Mike now, but he didn't get to be the one to make a big move to get rid of a threat. It changed the whole dynamic, and now he is just one of 6. And why would anyone give him the money?
That's right. That's very true.
Have to see how that goes. We did get, the final words from Shireen basically saying, like, no, she gets it. It would have been dumb for Mike to play his idol to save her. Well, and I think the other thing is, too, and this is reinforced in her Ponderosa video, is that I think we can all relate to the fact that she didn't want to get voted out because she loves the game. She would have liked to go to the end, but she also really didn't like very many of the people she was there with. And so the prospect of getting to go and stay in a nice resort with people she likes better is not a wholly horrible thing to contemplate.
Which sounds exactly like what Jen and Haley went through,
Yeah, although in some of the Ponderosa videos, Jen, it's increasingly clear, was never really that into the competitive aspect of the game to begin with. And that has rubbed some of the other people wrong a little bit, because she's done now saying, whoa, that was fun. Glad that's done. And they're all kind of like, Joe and Haley are kind of like, well, we kind of would have rather still been in there.
Yeah.
We kind of don't like you implying that it was all just anyway, not that, and they're not fighting or anything, but it's just also a little bit of some personality conflicts because they didn't want the same things.
Yeah. I think Shireen, I haven't seen it, but does she fall more in line with the Joe and Haley of, hey, wish I was still playing, but they're not that fun to be around?
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty much where she's at, is that, she really can't stand Dan or Will in particular. Not particularly a fan of Sierra or Rodney or Tyler or Carolyn, because they, even if they didn't participate, they also didn't defend her. Like, Mike is the only person that she really even likes at all. Whereas, back at, dealing with, Haley and Jen and Joe, especially once the competitive aspect is out of it, she gets along with them a lot better. Comparatively.
That's a tough thing right now, though, because so everybody on the jury right now, if you had to vote for the winner right now, they would all vote for Mike. And
Probably.
I know that there will be more people that end up on the jury, but
but they're divided. Like, there's not like, all the other people left there besides Mike are not like a unified voice.
It just makes me really want to root for him, because I feel like not only does he have a legitimate shot, if he can do the right things and get himself to the end, I think he has a legit shot at winning. Yeah. Because of how he has played. The front half of his game will mean something. Even if he had that little lapse, if he can recover enough to get to the end, that front half will mean something, because he will get enough votes on the jury.
Yep. It's kind of like when we're watching someone in the challenge and they get super wobbly, but then they recover. You know.
Oh God, that's what I'm rooting for.
I agree. I think that's what I would like to have happen at this point. Trying to think who else I would like. I guess I would like, the only people that I feel like I would really be upset if they won are people that I think it's very unlikely that they would win anyway.
Like Dan.
Yeah. And yet, so some of the other people, it's kind of like, well, I don't know, Carolyn, Tyler, I don't know, I don't care very much.
Well,
You know,
here's the hope that I kind of rebuilt within myself after this episode, after one more time where like the people I wanted to be around left, is part of the reason that it's hard to determine who you kind of want to root for in that group is because they refuse to like move from that group. So when they have to start doing stuff to each other, that's where I think people like you and I who are fans of this game, that's when the social dynamics will kick in.
mm-hmm.
We can start to watch who do we favor, how they're playing through that aspect of it. And we generate a favorite. You know, Tyler, as much as he's doing weird stuff now, if he makes it into that and manipulates the whole thing, then we may say, you know what? Good for him.
Because, I mean, we're heading into Endgame now, right?
And win, you know?
Yeah.
And we would root for that.
Well, like, it's also true that I feel like if Mike were to continue to win individual immunities and be able to just ride out the immunity as the rest of the tribe has to eat each other, that would be pretty entertaining.
Yeah, I don't know if that would be the right way for him to win. I would love for him to get to a point where he can actually like get through a vote, but
I find that unlikely at this point because every time he wins immunity, he just makes himself an even bigger target.
That's true. He becomes the guy who, as soon as he doesn't win immunity, you vote for him except that he has an idol.
Yeah, and they know that now. They know he has one now. And who else would he ever even play it for?
Right. But that means that they have to start splitting their votes. So if he can get that to a point where somebody might use it as advantageous to move over to tab his vote to get rid of another faction.
Well, and we also have Dan still got his double vote, and now he's mad. Things could happen.
Yeah, things are definitely going to happen. I have no doubt about that with this season. The votes may all go exactly the way we expect. Although, that's what I kept saying. At some point, they can't. They can no longer go the way we're expecting because at some point they will run out of people to get rid of. So,
all right. Well,
things will happen.
Yes,
that should be the name of the season.
What? Things will happen.
Things will happen.
That could be the name of every season, though. I suppose it would be a good name for every season.
Yeah, but they could do it with that Survivor delivery of
things will happen.
Will happen. Yeah. Anyway.
Survivor things ready? Happen. All right. So,
looking forward to it.
Yes. Thank you, everybody, for listening and or watching. And I'll try to get the audio up earlier than the last time. And so we'll be back for the next episode. Talk to you guys later.